Hello students, welcome to Civil Services Prime Time by CivicCentre IAS. So in this week, let's try to understand some of the important aspects when it comes to international relations, current affairs perspective. I have taken 6 important articles for the last 1 week on a topic of importance, and most important topic would be Duty-Free Tariff Preference Scheme, DFTP scheme, and this was recently seen in news because WTO, according to World Trade Organization report, India has given more access to underdeveloped countries or least developed countries. So that's why this topic is very important. Let's try to understand what are the topics that we have taken. So coming to the topics, the first one would be Asian India Summit. This one would be the 22nd Asian Indian Summit. What was the Asian grouping and what are the outcomes of this Asian Indian Summit that we will discuss. Second one, duty-free tariff preference scheme. According to WTO, India has given more prominence to least developed countries. Next one, rising antibiotic resistance, a global health emergency from the WHO perspective. What is this antibiotic resistance? What are the government initiatives to tackle this global health emergency from India's perspective? Fourth one would be global financial stability report. Released by IMF. Next one would be Saudi Arabia abolished the kafala system or sponsorship system. Mostly, you might heard this word in Middle East regions, especially since from 1950s or 60s. This system has been evolved in Saudi Arabia and other Middle East nations. So, what was this all about, and how it will affect India's migrants, especially from India's to Middle East nations, and this one would be one of the classical example of modern day slavery. But anyway, under the Vision 2030, the king of Saudi Arabia has abolished this Kapala system and introduced various measures for the progressive Saudi Arabia growth. Last one would be US sanctions on Russian oil and their implications for India. So this is the second time US has announced sanctions on Russian oil. What were the major impacts on India's economy? So that is the topics for discussion. So the first one would be 22nd Asian India Summit. So if you look at the countries, what were the Asian countries that we have depicted in this picture, and a headquarters. Sometimes this type of summits, mostly the groupings, whether developed groupings or developing nations groupings, these were frequently seen in news. Sometimes these headquarters and how they these bodies are working, these are very important for your prelims examination point of view. And why it was specifically I have taken this topic is Timor-Leste, one of the country that has recently joined as a 11th member in Asian group. So that's why I have taken this article. So if you look at the discussion, the 22nd Asian India Summit was held virtually under Malaysia's chairmanship as part of largest 47th Asian Summit in Kuala Lumpur. And Timor-Leste has formally joined ASEAN as the 11th member and participated in the summit for the first time as a full member. Before becoming a full member, generally the countries were given observer status. Next, full-time members. This is how the groupings are working generally. And what are the key outcomes of the summit? So obviously the Asian grouping is mostly focusing upon the maritime cooperation. India declared 2026 coming year as Asian Indian Year of Maritime Cooperation. Nothing but the maritime cooperation between the Asian group and India to advance collaboration in the blue economy and maritime security. Here not only they have focused maritime cooperation, and also they want to promote blue economy through Asian grouping, and at the same time maritime security also. So what are the security implications, especially in Asian region? So that will also under the maritime cooperation. Next one, sustainable tourism. If you look at the countries in ASEAN, obviously majority of the countries are tourism potential. They have more tourism potential. Obviously, the government wants to promote tourism so that they will earn extra incomes. A joint statement on sustainable tourism was adopted to promote eco-friendly practices aligned with 2025 Asian Indian Year of Tourism. So that is the sustainable tourism practices. Trade agreement review. India called for an early review of the Asian India trade in goods agreement. So here only Asian and India, when it comes to goods trade, they have focused only in goods, not in services, to be explicitly, to address the trade imbalances and streamline market access. That is the trade agreement review. India called for an early review so that it will go through the AITIGA, Asian India Trade in Goods and Agreement, and address the trade imbalances between Asian group and India. Next one, strategic partnership. The summit renewed the Asian Indian Comprehensive Strategic Partnership for the 2026 and 2030 with a focus on digital inclusion, food security and resilient supply chains. So the countries, whatever the present in Asian grouping, obviously they have to come under the digital inclusion. Just like how our financial inclusion has given a huge success for Indian economy, in a similar way, India is actively promoting digital inclusion. Each and every economy should be digitally empowered. And food security. Next one is food security. Resilient supply chains, because whenever any conflicts are going on, generally the choking points under Asian bloc, sometimes they might under the supply shocks. So to counter these supply shocks, resilient supply chains are very important. Next one, institutional initiatives. India proposed a Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Nalanda University and a Maritime Heritage Festival at Lothal, Gujarat. This is from institutional initiatives. So to promote education and to promote culture between Asian group and India, it has proposed Nalanda University and at the same time Maritime Heritage Festival at Lothal. So what is the significance of this summit? So India has been long-standing of its Act East policy. Before this Act East policy, we have Look East policy. So what were the Look East policy? What were the difference between this Act East policy and Look East policy? In earlier case, the country is only observing the what are the changes in political, economic and social conditions of the countries which were adjacent to India or in Asian grouping. But in last 10 years, probably in last 1 decade, the India is actively promoting economic, social and political aspirations of these nations. That's why Act East policy is very important. So the significance of this summit is reinforce Asians' centrality in India's Act East policy, and at the same time the countries harboring nearby Pacific region, Indo-Pacific strategic outreach efforts will be also done under Act East policy. That is the major significance of this summit. Regional stability. India reaffirmed its commitment as a trusted partner in ensuring peacetime and maritime stability in the Indo-Pacific. India's commitment towards a maritime stability and peaceful use of these maritime resources. Not like China. China is aggressively taking its stance against any smaller nations, but in quite opposite way, India has approached Big Brother. As a regional stability, India has committed a reaffirmation of peace and maritime stability. Next one, cultural linkages, civilizational links and people-to-people exchanges were highlighted to promote mutual trust and regional goodwill. So that is the from cultural perspective. So what are the opportunities in India-Asian relations? So what can we expect? So the first one is maritime security cooperation. Strategic alignment in the Indo-Pacific offers a scope of joint patrols between different countries. Maritime domain awareness, MDA. Maritime domain awareness and naval exercises between different hosting nations. That is the one of the opportunity for India. Economic integration. The review of AITAGA provides an opportunity to enhance market access of different countries. So there are countries, 10 countries are there, right? 11th one would be Timor-Leste. So all these countries have their market access for Indian goods. So that is one of the good economic integration, reduce non-tariff barriers, and boost regional trade. That's how your economic integration works. Digital and green economy, collaboration in digital public infrastructure (DPI), renewable energy and green technologies can drive sustainable growth. So not only India, even the smaller nations nowadays are mostly focusing on renewable energy, green energy technologies, and digital public infrastructure. Just like how our physical infrastructure works in a similar way, to continue these physical infrastructures in a proper way, digital public infrastructure also plays an important role when it comes to economies. Large scale finances and economies are works under digital public infrastructure. So digital and green economy, that is the one of the good opportunities for India. Connectivity and infrastructure projects like India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway IMT and Kaladan multimodal transit corridor strengthen physical and economic connectivity. So this Kaladan multimodal transit corridor is between India and Myanmar. Cultural diplomacy, shared values and heritage offers avenues for people-to-people exchange, tourism and education partnerships. So that will be cultural diplomacy. What is the way ahead? Accelerated economic integration, fast track the AATGA review. Already India and Asian group has come under this review, so that you can fast track this decision and expand cooperation in services and digital trade. So in earlier cases only goods were promoted, but we can expect it to be in services and digital trade also, so that both goods and services will have a greater market access in the Asian group. Enhance maritime presence, operationalize joint naval exercises between different nations, blue economy partnerships under 2026 maritime framework, so which will have a both maritime presence. Expedite physical, digital and energy connectivity corridors linking Northeast India with Southeast Asia. It is a gateway for Southeast Asia. Northeast India is generally considered as a gateway to Southeast India. That's why India has developed a policy of look east, and after that it has enhanced to act east policy. So from Northeast India itself, the government of India is actively participating in these countries' affairs, whether it should be economic or social and political and cultural. So that's why to deepen more connectivity between these physical, digital and energy corridors linking Northeast India with Southeast Asia is essential. Institutional strengthening, regular track 1.5 and 2 dialogues to enhance strategic trust and policy coordination between different groups or different countries you may consider. That is the first one regarding India and ASEAN 22nd group meeting. Next one, duty-free preference scheme. So what was the news all about? According to WTO, India is now top developing economy partner for least developed countries. LDC countries offering more extensive duty-free market access than China or the EU. If you compare it with China or European Union, India has given a more priority for least developed countries for their goods and services to enter into Indian markets. That's why this topic was very important. That is also known as Duty-Free Tariff Preference scheme. That's why WTO has praised India's economy and India's policies, especially for the imports from least developed countries. So it was launched in 2008 to provide preferential market access to least developed countries. Here only you need to focus on least developed countries. The decision was prompted by outcome of the WTO Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration December 2005. So sometimes the questions might be in prelims. Recently, we have seen some declarations, Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration that was recently seen in news, which will be related to which one of the following. So, you might carefully read this Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration 2005. Under the scheme, India became the first developing country to introduce a preferential tariff program for the least developed countries. And from 2008 itself, India has developed a preferential tariff programs for the least developed countries. So what were the key features of this scheme? Duty-free access to Indian markets. You don't need to pay majority of the cases any duty tax. India provides duty-free access for products originating from least developed countries, covering approximately 98.2% of tariff lines. Only 1.8% of product categories face regular duties. So if you round off this figure, 98 products, whatever the products that they have been coming from these least developed countries, they don't need to pay any taxes, but only 2% of goods will attract duties. The scheme applies to exports from eligible LDCs to Indian market. So here from LDs to Indian market, the scheme is applicable. What are the eligible countries? The scheme applies to all nations designated as least developed countries. So who will announce these least developed countries? United Nations will declare what were the countries that were least developed countries. India extends this preferential market access to approximately 48 countries, which have spanning around Africa, Asia, and the other Pacific regions of smaller island nations. So, what are the eligible products under this scheme? Agriculture products, textiles, garments, handicrafts, and traditional goods, leather goods, and minerals and metals. These were eligible products under the scheme. Technical assistance and training are offered to LDGs. So, what will be the motive behind this technical assistance and training? So, obviously, if you are well trained, you have well knowledge in your goods and services, obviously, it can improve your export quality and standards. LDGs under the scheme benefit from increased market access, export growth, and potential foreign investment. So, from least developed countries to India, they have market access. Obviously, India is giving market access almost 98%. Next one, export growth. From these countries, export growth will be very high. So, when the countries are promoting export growth, obviously they can expect foreign investments also. Foreign investments. So, that is the major key features. So, what will be the benefits to LDCs through this scheme? So, how these LDCs will benefit from this scheme? Export opportunities. Obviously, the India is incoming these goods from these nations, especially LDCs. Duty-free access helps LDCs to increase export volumes to India and thereby raise trade revenues. By exporting more goods to these nations, especially India, LDCs revenues will rise, trade revenues will rise. With enhanced exports, LDCs may generate employment, raise incomes, and support poverty reduction programs in their own countries. So, obviously, you are getting more revenues by exporting, right? So, to export more goods, obviously, you need to create a employment. That they will create employment. Obviously, that will raise incomes of these employment, and which will support poverty reduction programs in these countries. Obviously, these are very least developed countries. The scheme encourages LDCs to broaden their export base and develop comparative advantage across sectors. So here only in earlier cases the scheme focuses only in some sectors, but diversification of these sectors are also been under the mark. Technology and capacity building. Technical assistance under the scheme helps LDC exporters to improve product quality, increasing competitiveness also. So here WTO and the nations which are giving these LDC preferences are giving technical assistance and capacity building measures for these LDCs so that they can have more exports, they can have more product quality, and also which will increase the competitiveness between different LDCs, so that whenever any healthy competition is between any nations or any companies, obviously you can expect better product quality. So that how it will take by taking technology and capacity building measures from India and WTO. There is the second one discussion related to duty-free access.
Hello everyone. As you all know, Civil Services Prime Time is one of its kind initiative where we are teaching the students current affairs related to that particular subject one day at a time. అంటే ఒక వారంలో జరిగిన కరెంట్ అఫైర్స్ అన్ని ఒక సబ్జెక్ట్ కి సంబంధించి మేము ఒక రోజులో చెప్తున్నాం. సో దిస్ ఈజ్ ఆల్ బికాస్ ఆఫ్ ద రివర్స్ ఇంజనీరింగ్ టెక్నిక్. బికాస్ మీరు ప్రతి వీడియో చూసినట్టయితే ఎండ్ లో ప్రీవియస్ ఇయర్ క్వశ్చన్స్ ప్రిలిమ్స్ చేస్తున్నాము, అలాగే ఒక క్వశ్చన్ మెయిన్స్ ఇస్తాం. సో ఇన్ ఆర్డర్ టు గెట్ డైలీ అప్డేట్స్ అట్ 7 o'clock షార్ప్ యాజ్ వీఆర్ డూయింగ్ ఇట్, సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోండి, అలాగే బెల్ కూడా క్లిక్ చేయండి, సో దట్ 7 o'clock కి మీకు ఇమీడియట్ గా నోటిఫికేషన్ వస్తుంది.
Coming to the third discussion, rising antibiotic resistance, a global health emergency. So according to WHO, Global Antibiotic Resistance Surveillance Report 2025 warns that nearly 1 in 6 bacterial infections worldwide in 2030 were resistant to antibiotics. We are frequently using antibiotics over the counters, OTC, over the counters without any prescriptions. We are taking medicines. So these medicines will become antibiotics. So already the existing disease whatever we have with respect to bacterial infections, obviously 1 in 6 bacterial infections in 2023 were resistant to antibiotics. So whatever you have taken antibiotics to cure these diseases, these are not going to help you in any way because they have created a resistance. That is the biggest worry for global health. Between 2018 and 2023, resistance rose in over 40% of pathogens. Antibiotic combinations with annual increase of 5 to 15%, signaling accelerating global health emergency. So here antibiotic combinations with annual increase of 5 to 15%, each and every year it has been increased and it has given a resistance to the drugs. That's why it is known as antibiotic resistance. So what is antimicrobial resistance? Which occurs in microorganism when microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites evolve to resist the effects of drug designed to kill them. So generally these drugs are designed or manufactured to kill these microorganisms. If you frequently or if you overuse or misuse these medicines, then obviously it will create a resistance that is known as antimicrobial resistance. Example, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis resistant to both ionized and rifampicin. So these were the medicines. So obviously these medicines are not useful in any way. So if you have developed this resistance, antimicrobial resistance, then obviously the regular medicines whatever the available in the stores, these are not going to help you to treat your diseases. AMR makes infections harder to treat, increase hospital stays and raise mortality risk. So when you have developed antimicrobial resistance, obviously it is very harder to treat the patients and obviously you have to stay more time in the hospital. Whenever you are more time in hospital, obviously out of pocket expenditure will also be raised if you don't have any insurance. That is the caveat. And rise mortality risk and death risk also very high because of this antimicrobial resistance. So what were the key findings from WHO report? Scale of resistance. Globally 16% of lab confirmed infections for antibiotic resistance. The highest rates reported from Southeast Asia, Eastern Mediterranean, where 1 in 3 infections show resistance. From geographical perspective, which areas have highest antimicrobial resistance? Over 40% of E. coli and 50% of Klebsiella pneumonia strains are resistant to third generation medicines or antibiotic group. Nearly 48% countries did not report sufficient data to the global AMR surveillance system. Even the countries are also doing sometimes mistake. They are not reporting to the surveillance system. So if you're not reporting to surveillance system, obviously you cannot expect any quality schemes or programs exclusively for you. Reflecting weak diagnostic capacity and reporting infrastructure. Because of weak diagnostic capacities and reporting infrastructure, these countries, almost 48% of countries did not report with sufficient data. So what is India's perspective? India faces one of the highest burdens of AMR globally. So causes overuse of antibiotics, self-medication without visiting any doctors. You simply googling about the medicines, whatever the medicines that are required. Poor infection control and use of antibiotics in livestock. From livestock also you have a problem of this antimicrobial resistance. So what are the initiatives taken by Government of India? National Action Plan on AMR 2027 to 2025. AMR Surveillance and Research Network by Indian Council for Medical Research ICMR. One Health approach integrating human, animal and environmental health. So that is the initiatives that were taken by India for the combating antimicrobial resistance. Next one, Global Financial Stability Report, which will be published by IMF twice a year. One is in April, one is April, second one would be October. So International Monetary Fund has released the October edition of the twice a year Global Financial Stability Report. These reports, whether it should came from IMF, World Bank, or any other international organizations, so these are very important for your prelims point of view mostly, and even sometimes questions might expect from mains. So what is this Global Financial Stability Report? It provides a comprehensive assessment of global financial system, how global financial system works, what were the different in systematic risks that are posing a serious threat to global financial systems. These will be discussed in this report, highlighting vulnerabilities and giving policy recommendations to bolster resilience. So here they are not only discussing about what were the issues or what were the vulnerabilities in the global financial system, and at the same time they are giving some recommendations so that the countries can adopt these recommendations. Published by IMF twice a year in April and October. It focuses on current market conditions, highlighting systematic issues that could pose a risk to financial stability, and sustained market access by emerging market borrowers. Here, mostly focusing on borrowing, sovereign debt borrowings. So here they are mostly focusing on market conditions, systematic which poses a risk to financial stability and sustained market access by emerging market borrowers. So what were the key highlights of 2025 edition? Risk remain elevated. Whatever the risk that they have been present in the global financial system, that they have been at the same elevated stage. The report warns that despite calm surface conditions, financial stability risks are high due to stretched asset valuations, rising government debt, and the growing share of credit delivered by NBFCs which are less regulated. Nothing but in simple words, the asset valuations have been stretched. Rising government debt. Governments are actively taking loans, sovereign loans. So government debt has been accumulated. Next one, growing share of credit delivered by NBFIs, non-banking financial institutions especially. So sometimes these are also known as shadow banking units. So obviously these NBFIs are taking loans from banks and other markets, obviously which will have a contagious effect on global economic systems which are less regulated, because these NBFIs are very less regulated, so that it have a more risk on financial stability of the world economic systems. Asset price risk. Global risk asset prices like equities are above fundamental values, raising the danger of sudden corrections with broader market impact. So more than what you expect in these equities market, these values of these equities markets have been above the fundamentals. In future, let's suppose if these markets are adjusted according to the demand and supply, then obviously the sudden corrections of these market because of demand and supply of these equities market, then obviously it will have a broader impact on markets. Role of NBFCs. The expansion of non-bank credit, private equity funds, hedge funds, fintech lending, crypto markets is seen as a biggest systematic risk, because these NBFIs are actively promoting investments in these private equity funds, hedge funds, fintech lending and crypto markets, which poses as a biggest systematic risk now. NBFs are more vulnerable in volatile conditions and transmit shocks to the banking sector also, because whatever the money available with the NBFIs are obviously taken from banks. So if NBFs are unable to take up these risk, then obviously it will have a cascading effect on banking sector also. Sovereign bond market pressures. High debt and physical deficits are pushing longer term bond yields very higher. From sovereign bond market, nothing but the government bonds. These pressures could interact with banks or NBFs to trigger spillovers, especially where governments rely on narrow investor bases. So here the pressure might be sovereign bond market pressures might be from banks or NBFCs to trigger spillovers, because if these yields or bond yields are very higher, obviously the repayment obligations from governments will be very high. So obviously it will have a effects on banks or NBFCs. Local currency bond issuance and domestic investors have helped emerging markets to be more resilient. Here, more or less, the countries are mostly focusing on the domestic currencies. They are not depending upon the external currencies. So local bond issuance and domestic investors within the country's borders, they are getting the investors. So obviously, if these are within the economy and within domestic economies, then obviously it will be more resilient. But risk remain from global shocks and reversal of capital flows. From one side, it will be good. From second perspective, even though the world is globalized, right, after LPG reforms, so you can expect more global shocks and reversal of capital flows from foreign institutional investors, FIIs. Sometimes asset bubbles will be created in the stock markets. Next one, geopolitical risk and fragmentation. Tensions and decoupling increases financial market volatility, could reverse capital flows, impacting financial stability worldwide. Here, the ongoing conflicts between different countries and financial systems are involved in these geopolitical tensions. So obviously you can expect more market volatility and reverse capital flows from emerging economies to developed countries if any interest rates are rising in these developed nations. This will also pose a risk. That is the discussion of global financial stability report. Next one, Saudi Arabia abolished kafala sponsor system. So what is kafala system? Let's suppose if you are going to any Middle East nations for your work, obviously there we have a sponsor, local sponsor. They will simply sponsor the jobs in the Saudi Arabia. In return, what they will expect? They will simply take away your passports and control over your works. And if you want to move from one work location to another location or residency, obviously you can take permission from this kafala. That is the earlier system which was prevalent from 1950 and 60s to till 2025. But under Vision 2030, the Saudi Arabia king, under Vision 2030 document, they have removed this kafala system. So if you look at old kafala system, employer control and consent is very important. Whoever the providing opportunities to employees, their control and consent is very important. Exit permits and restrictions. So if you want to exit from your work location, obviously you need permission from your employer. Limited job mobility. So there is no scope of mobility in jobs. Limited job mobility. And if you look at new system, freedom to change. You can go wherever you have the work. Change jobs frequently. You can change the jobs. Self-service portals are there so that you can have greater accessibility or clarity on employers who are providing any jobs. Empowered and happier workers. So obviously you don't have to be worried about all these things under the old kafala system. So kafala system was introduced in 1950s across Gulf countries especially to regulate foreign workers and relied on local employers. So these local employers are known as kafil, who controlled workers' residency, employment status, ability to change jobs and permission to leave the country. These each and every aspect was controlled by kafil in earlier cases. Migrant workers are unable to change jobs or leave without the sponsor's written consent, often leading to exploitation and abuse. So, especially the migrant workers from countries like India, China, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, these are facing exploitation and abuse from your sponsors. So, what is issues and criticism? Global organizations, obviously, whenever any human rights violations are there, there is United Nations body, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International scheme, condemned the kafala system as a form of modern day slavery. So they are simply keep this kafala system as a form of modern day slavery. So what are the common issues included in this kafala system? Employers confiscating passports and delaying wages. So when you enter into these countries, obviously the sponsors will confiscate the passports. Without passport, you cannot get out from your countries, right? That is the problem. Delaying wages, obviously they are getting wages through employers. They are keep delaying the wages. No freedom to change jobs without sponsor approval. Without sponsor approval, you cannot change any jobs. Restrictions on leaving the country. If you want to leave the country to another nation or your home country, there are restrictions. Limited access to legal recourse and labor courts. So obviously, this kafala system by default limited access to legal recourse or labor courts. Heightened vulnerability for women workers, particularly in domestic roles, especially who are working in domestic roles in houses mostly, they are facing a high vulnerability. So, what will be impact on Indian workers? The policy change benefits over 1.3 crore migrant workers, including 1.3 crore Indians, a majority of Saudi Arabia's foreign workforce. So key benefits would include safe working conditions and improved access to justice. So in earlier cases it was not there, but in new system safe working conditions will be provided and improved access to justice. If you did not receive your payments or any issues are there, then obviously you can easily access to their justice systems. Freedom to switch employers without harassment. You can change your jobs frequently without any harassment from employers. Faster repatriation and redressal grievances. So if you have any redressals, obviously they will solve the redressals. Strengthen India-Saudi Arabia relations, especially under the labor domain, will be improved. It will be the kafala system. Next one, US sanctions on Russian oil and their implications for India. So United States has recently imposed sanctions on Russian oil, raising concerns that India's crude imports from Russia could decline sharply. So USA has imposed another set of sanctions on Russian oil, especially whoever purchasing Russian oil from Russia. So obviously they will have to take sanctions. So Russian oil formed 35% of India's total oil imports in 25, and over 2/3 came from Russia. 35% of total India's imports came from Russia. The recent decision by United States to impose sanctions on Russian energy are primary sanctions targeting the companies directly. Here, the companies who are purchasing actively from Russia, these will be targeted. These will be sanctioned and these will be imposed sanction. The US has also warned possible secondary sanctions targeting those buyers of Russian crude oil from Rosneft and Lukoil. These are their companies who are purchasing from these Rosneft and Lukoil. Obviously, they are getting secondary sanctions. The threat of secondary sanctions will have an immediate and powerful effect on India and Turkey, two of the three largest consumers of Russian crude. Not only India, even Turkey will also face restrictions, impose sanctions from USA. So here, India and Turkey both will face these sanctions. India opposes unilateral sanctions, but has earlier complied with US sanctions on Iranian and Venezuelan oil. So obviously India does not accept these unilateral sanctions, and if you look at earlier cases, it has complied with US sanctions. Whatever the US has given a sanctions or these sanctions, obviously by getting waivers from USA, from Iranian and Venezuelan oil, they are getting oil imports. So what will be the impact? Indian refineries, including public sector units, they are purchasing the oil from Russia, and Reliance Industries Limited (RIL) depend heavily on access to US markets and financial systems. So these public sectors of Indian government and at the same time private sectors like Reliance Industries Limited have more access to US markets and financial systems. So obviously it will have a greater impact on the operations. They require US financial access for raising funds, paying for imports and maintaining global partnerships, because here they are mostly focusing for their funds, US funds, and paying for imports and maintaining global partnerships. Because of these, the impact will be very high on India's public sector units and private sector units. Most of them have investments or subsidiaries operating in the United States. That is the problem. These companies, public sector undertakings and private sectors have more investments or subsidiary units in United States. So whenever United States slapped with any sanctions on these companies, obviously their financial conditions will become very turbulent. That is the biggest worry. If hit by secondary sanctions from Washington, they might have to sacrifice these ties, whatever the ties between India and USA. Obviously, you have to sacrifice the ties. India also imports crude oil and liquefied LNG gas from US, United States of America. From United States, it is shale gas. So that is the discussion for this week's current affairs from the IR perspective. So hope you like this session as usual. So if you have any doubts regarding these topics, you are always feel free to welcome, and you can contact through our Telegram channels or under the comment section in the YouTube sections also. So that is the discussion for international relations current affairs weekly session. For this week, we will meet up in next session. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.
CivicCentre IAS is offering Telangana Group 1 Prelims cum Mains classes as well as Andhra Pradesh Group 1 Prelims cum Mains classes in English medium for a period of 8 to 10 months. This also covers the complete NCERT textbooks and statewide textbooks. So what are you waiting for? Learn through reverse engineering technique today. Admissions are in progress. Join now. Visit our website. Thank you.